Hi students, welcome to lesson number 3 on characteristics of rural and urban communities and rural-urban continuum. In sociology, the family, marriage, kinship, education, political and economic system and religion are considered as the social institutions and which are very imperative for the sustenance of a society. Besides these social institutions, social groups, communities, associations also exist in all the societies across the world. Therefore, studying social institutions and other social organizations like communities and social groups is essential in sociology. This is the reason why we as a student of sociology are studying various communities. In this context, this lesson tries to make the students to understand about the rural community, its definitions and characteristics. Urban community, its definition and characteristics. Third, the rural-urban continuum. In general, community is a territorial group which shares a common geographical area. We may call it as a locality wherein a common way of life can be seen. Community. Community is not just about living together, but developing a sense of we feeling. People living within a certain area tend to cluster together and share a sense of belongingness naturally, as humans are social animals. Thus, different areas develop different way of life, different cultures, thereby forms different communities. However, communities can be divided on various grounds. On the basis of areas of residence, community can be divided into urban, semi-urban, rural and tribal communities. Although Indus Valley civilization of Indian subcontinent is known for urban society, on the other hand, rural society also exists predominantly in India. Hence, studying both rural and urban communities is important to understand the historical processes of Indian society. Since rural societies are presenting the pre-modern as well as the traditional way of social life, the urban society delineates the modern ways of social life. Therefore, dwelling deeper into definitions, characteristics, structure and functions of rural and urban communities is a prerequisite for a sociology student. Rural community. Let's begin with the discussion with rural community. According to Robert Redfield, he describes the rural community as small, isolated, non-literate and homogeneous with a strong sense of group solidarity. Behavior is traditional, spontaneous, uncritical and personal. There is no legislation or habit of experiment and reflection for intellectual ends. However, the structure of rural community basically depends upon its 10 essential characteristics. First, it is the size of the community. The village or rural communities dwell in small in geographical area as a substantial amount of lands are available in villages. These areas are scatterly populated. Next, it is density of population. Number of inhabitants are very low in proportionate to the amount of land exists in rural areas. Therefore, the density of population is also low. Hence, low density of population is one of the characteristics of rural communities. Next, agriculture as primary profession. Agriculture is a fundamental occupation of the rural people which is mostly a subsistent pattern of occupation. It is not yet commercialized and it also forms the basis of rural economy. A farmer with the help of his family members has to perform various agricultural activities. Hence, it is not only an individual's profession, but of all family members too. Thus, the members of the entire family share agricultural activities. That is the reason why Laurie Nelson has mentioned that farming is a family enterprise. Next, close contact with nature. The rural people are in close contact with nature, as most of their daily activities revolve around the natural environment. Thus, rural habitants are more influenced by nature than urban residents. The villagers consider land as a real mother, as they depend on it for their food, clothing and shelter. Next, the homogeneity. In all regards, the rural communities are homogeneous in nature. For example, almost all the rural dwellers are connected with agriculture and its allied occupations. They live similar sort of houses and have similar pattern of dressing styles. Thus, everywhere they are homogeneous. Next, it is joint family. One of the important features of the rural communities is joint family, wherein parents and their married children used to live under one roof and share a common kitchen. Generally, the father is the head of the family as he holds entire responsibility of the family. However, joint family is considered as social insurance by the social scientist. Next, it is the primary relations. The frequency of social interaction in rural areas is comparatively low than in urban areas. The interaction level possesses more stable and more continuous. The relationships and interaction in the primary groups are very proximate. However, the social relations in rural communities are primary, stable and intimate too. Next, it is organic social solidarity. Social solidarity depends upon the sense of we feeling and proximity social relationships. Since rural masses have solid we feeling and involved in frequent intimate social relationship, the degree of social solidarity is greater in rural areas as compared to urban centers. Common experiences, purposes, customs and traditions form the very basis of unity in the villages. Now, the birth based on social stratification. The social stratification in rural areas form on the basis of traditional characteristics like caste and gender. As caste is a unique characteristic of Indian society, the Indian rural communities comprise of caste-based social stratification. Thus, caste hierarchy determines the social status of the rural people. Next characteristic is social mobility. The social mobility in rural areas is highly rigid, as all the occupations are based on caste. Shifting from one occupation to another is difficult in rural communities as caste and occupation of each and every individual is determined by birth. Hence, rural people do not have free choice to select their profession. By examining the features of rural community, it is to be said that rural communities are smaller in size, having less number of population and dwell in more spacious geographic area. Thus, density is also low. Rural community by and large engages in agriculture and its allied occupations. Rural people tend to live in joint families and indulge in primary and intimate social relationships in their everyday life. Thereby, social solidarity is more among them. Next is the caste-based occupation and caste-based social stratification are another important feature of rural communities. Therefore, social mobility is less among them. Although caste and religion may vary in rural areas, rural people are similar in all regards. Hence, rural community is known for its own unique pattern of homogeneity. By the advent of modernization, Indian independence and enforcement of the constitution, several changes were taken place in rural communities. But it is mostly resembling the traditional kind of society in terms of structure and function. Thus, rural community is different from the urban community. Now, we will discuss about urban community. Urban community means the city community. The history of every civilization is a history not of its countryside, but of its cities and towns. Though the term urban is popularly used, it is not properly defined. According to 𝗂𝗏𝗏, city is a limited geographic area inhabited by a largely and closely settled population, having many common interests and institutions under local government authorized by the state. But Robert E. Park has seen city far from being a mere collection of individuals and of social conveniences, rather a state of mind, a body of customs and traditions, and the organized attitudes and sentiments that inhere in these customs. Edna F. Weber defined the city as any incorporated place with a minimum of 10,000 inhabitants. Lewis Worth's idea of city may be defined as a relatively large, dense and permanent settlement of socially heterogeneous individuals. Though some sociologists have tried to define the concept of urban, no one has given a satisfactory definition so far. So, as 𝗂𝗺𝗔𝗀 writes, everybody seems to know what a city is, but no one has given a satisfactory definition. Similarly, Kingsley Davis writes, much ink has been wasted in trying to define urban. However, McIver mentioned there is no sharp demarcation to tell where the city ends and country begins. Every village possesses some elements of the city, while every city carries some features of the village. Different criteria are used to decide a community as urban. Some of them are population, legal limits, types of occupations, and social organization. Now, let us see the features of urban community. Now, let us discuss the features of urban community. The first feature, it is large in size and high density of population. The size of an urban community is much larger than that of a rural community. A large number of population in urban areas live in a limited area. Therefore, the density is much more higher when compared to rural communities. Urbanity and its size and density are positively correlated. Second, it is the plurality of occupations. In urban centers, the division of labor is based on education and occupational specialization. The major occupations are industrial, administrative, and professional in nature. The other feature is the family and marriage. So far as urban community is concerned, greater importance is attached to the individual than to the family. Nuclear families are more popular in urban areas. In case of marriages, in urban communities, there is a preponderance of choice marriages and intercaste marriages too. One can also observe a greater number of divorces in urban families. Next, it is the pattern of social interaction. The social structure of urban communities is based on interest groups. The circles of social contact are wider in the city than in the rural areas. There is a wider area of interaction system per man and per aggregate. This makes city life more complex and varied. The city life is characterized by the predominance of secondary contacts, impersonal, casual, and short-lived relations. Other feature, it is anonymity and loss of identity. As Bogadas observes, the urban groups have a reputation for namelessness. By virtue of its size and population, the urban community cannot be a primary group. Here, nobody knows anybody and nobody cares for anybody. The urbanized do not care for their neighbors and have nothing to do with their miseries or pleasures. Hence, identity is immaterial for them. Next feature, it is social heterogeneity. As the cities are characterized by diverse people, races, ethnicities and cultures, there is greater variety in regard to the food habits, dressing patterns, living conditions, religious beliefs, cultural outlook, customs and traditions of the urban dwellers. Thus, rural communities are known for homogeneity, while the cities are symbolized with socio-cultural heterogeneity. Now, the social distance. Social distance is a result of anonymity and heterogeneity. Most of one's own routine social contact in urban communities are impersonal and segmentary in character. Therefore, the urban social responses are incomplete and half-hearted. However, one can see a great lacuna of personal involvement in the affairs of other individuals. Next, it is a class-based social stratification. Social stratification in urban areas is basing on the skill that acquired by education. As the education increases, the salary or earning goes high. Therefore, the economic based class pattern of social stratification evolves gradually. In fact, class is extremely characterizing the city. For example, in a slum, poor may exist alongside of splendid bungalows of the rich, which may amidst to an apartment wherein middle class members live. Another major feature of urban community is social mobility. In an urban area, the social status of an individual is not determined by his heredity or birth, but by his merit, intelligence and perseverance. In case one has skill and talent, he or she can move to any kind of stage, unlike the conventional rural occupational pattern. Hence, urban areas are much prone to social and geographical mobility as well. Other feature is formal social control. Social control in urban community is essential formal in nature. Individuals' behavior is regulated by such agencies as police, jails, laws, courts, etc. Another major feature is a modern lifestyle. Modernity is a state of thought wherein people used to think rationally. That means urban people are inclined to use the reason and argument. The urbanites attach supreme importance to their own welfare and happiness. They hesitate to think or act for the good of others. Therefore, their relationship with others is governed for the most part by the consideration of gain or loss. Relationship takes place on a contractual basis. Once the contract is over, human relationship automatically comes to the end. Thus, in the urban community, the social existence of man revolves around wealth and material possessions. The worth of an urban dweller is being judged not by what he is, but by what he has. Status symbols in the form of financial assets, salaries, costly home appliances count a lot for the urbanites. In cities, rituals and kinship obligations are being diluted. Caste and community considerations yield to economic logic. This results in secularization outlook. Now, the role conflict. The factors such as the size, density and heterogeneity of the population, extreme occupational specialization and the class structure prevalent in the urban context lead to such a state of affairs wherein role conflict is inevitable. In the absence of uniform and fixed social norms, individuals or groups often seek divergent ends. This has a considerable share in causing social disorganization. Next major feature is a rapid social and cultural change. Rapid social and cultural change characterize urban life. The importance attached to traditional or sacred elements has been relegated to the background. The benefits of urban life have affected changes in respect of norms, ideologies and behavior patterns. Another feature, it is voluntary association. The urban community is characterized by impersonal, mechanical and formal social contacts occurring among the people. Naturally, they have a strong desire for developing genuine social relationship to satisfy their hunger for emotional needs and sense of security, for which they form associations, clubs, societies and other secondary groups. Now, we will discuss on rural-urban continuum. In general, continuum means continuity. By rural-urban continuum is meant continuity from the village to the city. In other words, it is merging of town and village. The concept is used in recognition of the fact that there is no sharp division, either physically or socially, to draw a clear boundary between the rural and urban communities. However, those are having mutual traits and practices. This continuous process of transition or imitation is known as rural-urban continuum. In fact, the concept was first used by Robert Redfield in the year 1930, who made an important contribution to develop the concept of folk, rural and urban continuum. He has constructed a continuum from small rural villages to large cities. One end of this continuous scale is the village and the city will be at the other end. Both these social formations are in ceaseless interaction. That is the reason why villages show the profound impact of city life and certain cultural traits from villages are developed in cities. The continuum also shows that the development is from the village to the city. Over a period of time, villages are transformed into towns and cities. The continuum theory lays emphasis on the rural-urban differences rather than on the rural-urban dichotomy. Irrespective of the course of evolution, distinction can be drawn between rural and urban way of life. The difference between urban centers and rural areas may seem so obvious that the definition should not be an issue. However, there can be various major variations in the ways in which different nations define what is an urban center. The criteria used include population size and density and the availability of services such as the educational institutions, hospitals, banks and so on. Now, we will discuss about the causes of rural-urban continuum. First cause, the migration has been thought to be the most significant factor contributing to the rural-urban continuum, and thus formation of such settlement take place. Next, it is politics has a role to play in the process of diminishing rural-urban difference in terms of amenities and facilities. The size and density of agricultural land in rural areas is huge, but the economic activities of the population are at least in nature when it is compared with the urban communities. Poverty in urban areas pushes the stakeholders to adopt the simple way of housing and lifestyle which is akin to rural populace. Urban-rural network and linkages may reduce the difference between them, and all sorts of exchanges and imitations takes place as a continuous process. However, the rural social world is different from the urban social world. There is a valid distinction between village and city in terms of two different ways of life: cultural patterns, socio-cultural groupings and modes of earning through different livelihoods. The village is considered as a basic unit of settlement. It does not mean that urban systems are not basic. There are also structural similarities between these two with regard to the patterns of caste, kinship, rules of marriage, observance of religious practices, migrations, educational institutions, employment opportunities and administration, which are the sources of linkages between villages and cities. Education, for example, is becoming a transnational in nature as we are moving towards a knowledge society. Thus, villages and towns cannot be seen simply as dichotomous entities. They are interlinked and yet distinct from each other. This lesson has focused on the characteristics of rural and urban communities: smaller in size, low density, intimate and primary social relations, close contact with nature, birth-based social stratification, less social mobility, agriculture as main profession, more of homogeneity in all regards are the essential characteristics of rural communities. While urban communities are large in size with high density, skill-based occupation, class-based social stratification, high social and geographical mobility, secondary or professional relationships, heavy role conflict, presence of interest groups, voluntary associations and more particularly the modern way of lifestyles are essential features of urban communities. The lesson has also taught the rural-urban continuum, which means the continuous process of transmission of rural areas into urban centers. Although there is a distinction between rural and urban communities, we cannot categorically draw a line between them, as many of rural characteristics can be seen in urban centers and several cultural practices and trends of urban communities can also be witnessed in rural areas.